September 1st, 1939. Before dawn, you hear the metallic whisper of tracks and the high, thin scream of aircraft slicing the cold air. German tanks roll across the Polish border, and within hours, that single morning shatters the fragile calm of a continent. Europe is at war again, but this moment didn't arrive out of nowhere. If you step back 2 decades, you can trace the slow, dangerous drift from fragile peace into global catastrophe. Imagine the world in 1918, cities scarred by shells, landscapes pocked with craters, families mourning the missing. Empires that once seemed eternal, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, Russian, lie toppled. The victors sat down to write a new order, and the Treaty of Versailles emerged as the paper promise of peace. On its face, it's reasonable. Punish the aggressor, secure stability, prevent repeat horrors. But the treaty lands on Germany like a slab of concrete. It forces Germany to accept sole responsibility for the war, strips territory, mandates crippling reparations, and limits its military to a shadow of its former self. For the Allied leaders, it's justice. For many Germans, it's humiliation and injustice. Picture an economy already exhausted by war being asked to shoulder a mountain of debt. Picture money losing value by the hour, savings evaporating. Humiliation breeds resentment. Resentment is fertile ground for radical ideas. The peace meant to stop war ends up feeding the conditions for a different kind of conflict. Political institutions wobble. Extremist movements find footholds in the chaos. Then the world economy convulses. In 1929, the Great Depression ripples across seas and borders. Factories close, banks fail, and unemployment skyrockets. You can almost feel the air grow colder. Shop fronts shutter, bread lines lengthen, and people who believed in democratic solutions watch them falter under the weight of desperation. Germany is hit particularly hard. The reparations and post-war instability make recovery slow and fragile. Savings are wiped out, businesses die, and millions of people face an uncertain future. When a society's basic needs feel threatened, trust in established leaders declines. In that vacuum, strong men and radical parties look appealing because they speak in decisive, simple terms where complexity feels paralyzing. Enter Adolf Hitler, a former soldier with a knack for performance and a voice that promised to cut through the mess. He offered a narrative many German families wanted to hear. Restore national pride, reject humiliation, rebuild the military, and reunify German-speaking people under one flag. His charisma and propaganda turned private frustrations into public fury. By 1933, he was chancellor. Within months, the democracy was hollowed out, opponents silenced, institutions bent to the will of a single leader. Germany moved quickly from political weakness to authoritarian strength, and with that shift, the shape of Europe began to tilt dangerously. Hitler's vision wasn't limited to rhetoric. He believed Germany needed Lebensraum, living space, especially to the east. That phrase carries images of farming land, resources, and room for a growing nation. To pursue it, he rebuilt the German military, first quietly, then brazenly. Conscription returned. The Air Force reappeared. Troops marched into the Rhineland, a symbolic and strategic blow to the Versailles restrictions. Each step broke the letter of the peace treaty. But the reaction from Britain and France was cautious, hesitant, muted. You can picture the leadership in London and Paris, fresh in memory with trenches and slaughter. Appeasement creeps in not as a clever policy, but as a weary gamble. Maybe giving in here will prevent a larger war later. 1938 is a turning point. Germany annexes Austria in the Anschluss, a political absorption carried out with little effective resistance. Then Hitler's attention turns to the Sudetenland, a border region of Czechoslovakia. In a meeting you can imagine as oddly cordial at the time, the Munich Agreement, Britain and France agree to hand the Sudetenland over to Germany, hoping to satisfy Hitler's demands and preserve peace. For many watching, it feels like a calm solution. For those who know the deeper currents, it's proof that restraint can be mistaken for weakness. Appeasement is a policy built on trust in the wrong places. The basic idea is simple. Give a revisionist power limited concessions to avoid a broader conflict. It sounds reasonable until it's not. Every concession sent a clearer signal to Hitler. The Western powers were unwilling to stop him. His appetite grew, not because he was irrational, but because every success changed the cost-benefit calculation. By March 1939, German troops occupied Prague and the remainder of Czechoslovakia fell apart. The fantasy that negotiations and concessions could check Hitler collapsed. His ambitions were no longer limited to correcting perceived injustices on paper. They were expansive, aggressive, and increasingly unquestioned inside Germany. Then came a diplomatic shock. In late August 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union, two regimes that despised one another ideologically, signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. The agreement publicly pledged non-aggression. Secretly, it carved Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. Poland, tragically, was split on paper between Berlin and Moscow. This pact is strategic genius from Hitler's narrow perspective. He had feared the specter of a two-front war, a replay of the nightmare Germany suffered in World War I. With the Soviet Union neutralized, at least temporarily, Hitler could swing east. For Stalin, the pact bought time to prepare and reorganize an army shattered by purges. For the rest of Europe, it was bewildering, ideological foes cooperating in a cynical deal that ignored the people who lived in the lands between them. Dawn on September 1st. The Blitzkrieg begins, and it's a harsh, efficient machine. Fast-moving tanks, precise airstrikes, and infantry following in a rhythm designed to prevent a modern response. Blitzkrieg isn't just a tactic. It's an expression of a new kind of warfare. Speed, coordination, shock. Within weeks, Poland is overwhelmed. Cities burn, refugees flood roads, and the world watches a sovereign nation dissolved by force. 2 days later, Britain and France declare war on Germany. It's both symbolic and tragic. Symbolic because the declaration returns Europe to a state of open conflict. Tragic because those declarations came after Poland had already been devastated. The Soviet Union moves from the east, and Poland is effectively partitioned between two predators. What began as a targeted invasion becomes a wider war of occupation and resistance. At first, the fighting seems concentrated in Europe. Germany sweeps through Western Europe with stunning speed. France falls. Britain stands isolated but defiant. The map of the continent is remade in months, but another theater is already boiling over in Asia. Japan, pursuing its own imperial ambitions, has been at war in China and elsewhere since the early 1930s. In December 1941, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor, and the United States, until then focused on hemispheric concerns and aid to allies, is drawn fully into the global conflict. Suddenly, theaters in Europe, Africa, the Pacific, and Asia knit together into a worldwide struggle for control, resources, and survival. By 1945, the human cost is almost unimaginable. Tens of millions dead, cities flattened, genocides and atrocities that stain history. The world isn't the same. Borders shift, empires collapse further, and a new international order rises out of the wreckage, one determined to prevent a repeat of that scale of violence. So, what do you take away from this sweep of events? World War II wasn't the result of a single act. It was the culmination of many decisions, mistakes, and misread signals, a peace treaty that humiliated and destabilized, an economic collapse that shredded public trust, the rise of extremist politics that promised quick answers, a policy of appeasement that misread intention as negotiability, and aggressive expansion that relied on speed and surprise. The invasion of Poland was the spark, but the tinder had been piling up for decades. History teaches a cautious lesson. Wars rarely appear overnight. They build quietly through economic pain, political polarization, and the erosion of norms. The cost of misjudging motives, of assuming restraint where ambition exists, and of underestimating the power of desperation and grievance is painfully clear in the pages of the 1930s. As you think about that turbulent decade, notice how small decisions aggregate into massive outcomes. That's not a fatalistic statement, it's a practical one. Understanding the context, the incentives, and the human pressures that pushed nations into conflict helps you see how peace can be fragile and how diplomacy, credible deterrence, and social resilience matter. The world fell into chaos not because of a single night of violence, but because of years of bad compromises, economic shock, and the rise of leaders who turned private humiliation into public aggression. Remembering how it happened helps you recognize the patterns worth challenging before they cascade into catastrophe.